At 7:30 on the morning of July 1st, 1916, whistles blew along the British line on the Somme. Men climbed ladders out of trenches, stepped into no man's land, and began moving toward the German front. For days they had heard their own artillery hammer the opposite side. Many had been told that the barrage would cut the wire, smash the trenches, and make the advance possible. What they met instead was one of the most devastating mornings in British military history. The Somme did not begin as a single battlefield accident. It was part of an Allied plan made under pressure. In 1916, the Western Front was locked in trench warfare. Germany was bleeding France at Verdun. The Allies needed a major offensive that would relieve pressure, wear down the German army, and show that the coalition could still act. The Somme became that offensive, a French-British attack along a river valley in northern France, planned before Verdun became a crisis and then reshaped by it. Industrial war made the plan look logical on paper. Artillery would do what courage alone could not do. Shells would destroy barbed wire, collapse dugouts, silence machine guns, and break defensive systems before infantry crossed open ground. The British bombardment lasted days. It was immense, loud, and psychologically overwhelming, but noise is not the same as destruction. Many shells were poor quality or failed to explode. Deep German dugouts survived. Wire remained tangled and deadly. Machine gun crews waited underground until the barrage lifted. The men who went over the top carried the weight of doctrine, expectation, and kit. Some moved in waves with rifles, grenades, shovels, ammunition, water, and equipment. Officers and soldiers tried to keep order across torn earth, shell holes, smoke, and wire. In places where the artillery had worked, troops advanced. In other sectors, the attack was cut apart almost immediately. German defenders emerged from dugouts, set up machine guns, and fired into lines of men who had been visible from the moment they left the trench. By the end of that first day, the British Army had suffered roughly 57,000 casualties, including about 19,000 dead. Numbers that large can become numb, so the map matters. At Beaumont-Hamel, the Newfoundland Regiment advanced into fire and was nearly destroyed as a fighting force in minutes. Along different sectors, battalions that had trained together, lived in the same towns, or enlisted as neighbors were broken together. The Somme turned community into casualty list. The French army, attacking on the southern part of the front, often made more progress on July 1st than the British did. That difference matters because it prevents a simple story of universal failure. The Somme was not one identical experience across every yard. Artillery effectiveness, terrain, German defenses, training, command decisions, and local conditions varied. Some objectives were taken, some were not. But the scale of British loss on the first day became the enduring symbol because it exposed the terrible mismatch between offensive ambition and defensive firepower. German side was not passive scenery. German troops had built layered defenses, trenches, deep shelters, strongpoints, machine gun positions, communication routes, and artillery observation. They suffered heavily too, especially under bombardment and later attacks, but their preparations blunted the Allied timetable. The Somme became a contest of systems as much as soldiers. Guns against dugouts, wire against shells, rail supply against mud, staff maps against a landscape that changed by the hour. For the men in the line, strategy narrowed into physical detail. Mud grabbed boots, wire snagged uniforms and equipment, shell holes became shelter or traps, smoke hid movement and confusion. A wounded man might wait in the open because stretcher bearers could not cross the same fire that had hit him. Officers lost contact with neighboring units, runners disappeared, telephone wires were cut. The battlefield punished every assumption that command had made at a distance. Yet the campaign did not end on July 1st, it continued into November. That is one reason the Somme is harder to understand than a single disaster. Over months, the Allies advanced only a limited distance at enormous cost. The battle consumed British, French, and German armies. Tanks appeared for the first time in September, new weapons entered old problems, and commanders learned painfully about creeping barrages, coordination, and the limits of frontal assault. Tactical adaptation happened, but it happened inside a machine that kept demanding lives. The cost was not only British. Across the campaign, total casualties for all sides exceeded 1 million by many common estimates. The number includes killed, wounded, missing, and captured. It is a measure of industrial capacity as well as human suffering. Railways brought shells, factories made guns and ammunition. States mobilized workers, money, food, horses, medicine, and propaganda. The Somme was not merely men charging machine guns. It was societies learning how much destruction modern systems could sustain. That is why the battle still speaks to a world that watches trenches, artillery, drones, and attrition return to headlines. The comparison must be careful. 1916 is not today. Technology, politics, surveillance, air power, medicine, and command systems have changed. But the historical mechanism remains recognizable. When defensive firepower, fortified positions, industrial supply, alliance commitments, and political pressure converge, battle can become arithmetic. Commanders count shells, yards, replacements, morale, and time. Soldiers pay the account in bodies. The Somme also changed Britain's memory of the First World War. The first day became a symbol of sacrifice, controversy, and grief. It raised questions that have never fully gone away. Were the losses necessary, avoidable, misunderstood, or the brutal price of defeating an army that could not be wished away? Historians argue about command responsibility, strategic effect, learning curves, and alternatives. A serious history does not need to pretend those debates are settled. It needs to show why they exist. One reason they exist is that the Somme did contribute to wearing down the German army, but not in a way that makes the human cost easy to defend. The offensive relieved some pressure on the French at Verdun and forced Germany to commit reserves. It gave the British army terrible experience in large-scale warfare, but the battlefield gains were limited and the casualty lists were staggering. Effect and waste can exist in the same event. That is what makes the Somme morally difficult. The visual memory of the battle is a landscape of trenches, blasted trees, guns, graves, and men waiting with faces too young for the war around them. Photographs can mislead if they're treated as the whole truth, but they still carry evidence. Duckboards over mud, helmets above parapets, artillery teams, stretcher parties, and villages reduced to stone fragments. They show a war fought by human beings inside a mechanical system larger than any one unit could see. At Thiepval and other memorial sites, the Somme became names carved in stone. The missing are present by absence. The cemeteries are orderly because the battle was not. That contrast is part of the lesson. Commemoration gives shape to grief, but it cannot reverse the chaos that produced it. It can only insist that the dead not be reduced to a statistic, even when the battle itself is remembered through numbers. So the Somme should not be remembered only as incompetence, and it should not be sanitized as necessary sacrifice. It was a collision between strategic pressure, alliance duty, imperfect technology, command confidence, defensive depth, and the courage of soldiers who had to act inside decisions made far above them. Its first day remains shocking because it compresses that collision into a few hours of morning light. The past made clear is that July 1st, 1916 was not a mystery of courage. The courage was everywhere. The failure was in the belief that industrial fire could make industrial defense simple. The Somme revealed that modern war could turn planning into loss at a speed no society was ready to absorb. More than a century later, its warning is not that every offensive is doomed or that every general is blind. The warning is sharper. When a battlefield becomes a system of machines, trenches, shells, supply, and political pressure, human bravery is not enough to make bad assumptions true. There is one more reason the Somme endures. It exposes the distance between the language of headquarters and the reality of ground. On a staff map, a line could be advanced with a pencil. In a trench, the same line meant wire, smoke, mud, noise, fear, and the question of whether the man beside you would still be there after the next minute. History becomes clearer when both scales are kept in view. The generals were trying to solve a strategic problem. The soldiers were inside a physical one. The tragedy of the Somme is that the strategic answer repeatedly depended on men crossing a landscape that technology had made almost impossible. That is why the battle cannot be left as a slogan. It was not only futility, and it was not only heroism. It was a hard lesson in how societies use power, how institutions learn too slowly, and how modern war measures success in ways that can hide the individual cost. The fields of the Somme became quieter. The argument they left behind did not.